Hi. So we discussed environmental and situational variables that may increase the likelihood of an aggressive response. For decades, this field has studied the effects of violent media on aggressive behavior. The general consensus is that violent media consumption can increase the likelihood of an aggressive response, as evidenced by correlational and experimental research. Now, this research is not without its limitations. All research is going to have limitations. The research has been criticized for decades by industry that profits from violent media. Now, that's not to say that any one side is more biased, but because this research is so contested, it becomes that much more important to critically analyze not just individual studies, but also the overarching theory and entire body of research evidence. And so we'll attempt to do that. So let's start with a point that we've already discussed, which is that situational variables may increase the likelihood of an aggressive response. No one is arguing that violent media is the sole cause of aggression. If you are having a good day, you're well adjusted, you're a happy person, then it is unlikely that you'll play a violent video game and then out of the blue just decide to become a mass murderer. Of course, that's absurd. And even when we look at the Bandura Bobo doll study, we have provocation of our preschoolers. And so if you'll recall from the Bandura Bobo doll study, we have preschoolers who watch a video of an adult model. And they're randomly assigned to conditions in which they watch a video of the adult model kind of calmly playing with Tinker Toys, or they watch an adult model who pummels and physically and verbally aggresses against a Bobo doll. Well, what happens next after viewing either of these videos is that our preschooler is provoked. So how they provoke a preschooler is that they take them down the hall and they open up this door to a room filled with toys. And right as our child is entering the room, the researcher pulls them back and says, "Oh, no, 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 no. You know, these are my best toys, and I really don't want you playing with them. I want to save them for the other kids." And so, we realize, and even our preschoolers realize that that's messed up, right? That's insulting to say that, I'm not good enough for the good toys. So they're insulted, they're provoked, and then they're taken down the hall to another room with toys, in which one of those toys is the Bobo doll. And so that is where we see that the children who are provoked and who see the video of the adult model aggressing against the Bobo doll, not only are themselves aggressive, but that they replicate the unique aggressive responses that they saw in the video. So they're able to learn new ways to behave aggressively from watching a video of an adult model. But so kind of what we're seeing is that if you've just played a violent video game or just watched a violent film, or you have a steady diet of violent media and you were provoked or insulted, you may be more likely to choose that aggressive response. Early research is also criticized for relying on correlational methods, which is problematic because there are multiple possible interpretations. If we find a significant correlation between violent media consumption and aggression, it could be that violent media led to the aggressive behavior, but it could also be that people who are dispositionally more aggressive seek out violent media that reinforces their own personality, that it's the aggression leading to media consumption rather than the other way around. And this makes sense, that we would want to see ourselves reflected in the media that we consume. And if we look at research, findings suggest that viewing violence has the strongest effects on those who are already predisposed to behave aggressively. So the effects of violent media on aggressive behavior are stronger for those who are predisposed in terms of their personality, their disposition to behave aggressively. We can also look to longitudinal studies that measure violent media consumption and aggressive behavior at separate time points to track changes in these behaviors over time. What is especially valuable here is to look at what is called a cross-lagged panel design. And so we have both variables being measured at multiple time points. We have violent TV consumption and aggression that's measured at age 8 and also at age 19. And so what we can do is we can essentially compare correlations here. And of course we see the strongest correlation is between behavior at time point 1 and time point 2. Right? So aggressive behavior at age 8 and age 19. So aggressive kids at age 8 grow up to be aggressive young adults, and this sort of makes sense. But what's striking is to look at these crossed correlations here. So if we look at aggression at age 8 and its correlation with violent TV consumption at age 19, so aggression leading to violent media consumption, we see that that correlation is almost non-existent. And maybe this makes sense for many of you. I know for myself, you know, I definitely wasn't an aggressive 8-year-old, but as an adult, I consume a great deal of aggressive media. What we see here, if we look at TV violence at age 8, is a somewhat weak but significant correlation with aggression at age 19, and much stronger than the correlation between aggression leading to TV violence. We can also look at experimental evidence. We have participants that are in the laboratory randomly assigned to watch a violent video versus a non-violent video, where they're randomly assigned into conditions in which they play a violent video game versus a non-violent video game. And then they are given the opportunity to aggress against maybe an opponent in a competitive game, for instance. And so the experimental evidence, what this helps to do is to create equivalent baseline groups. So it helps us to rule out existing individual differences like dispositional or trait aggression. So if we randomly assign people to conditions, then all of our kind of high trait aggressive individuals should not be in the violent video group. Right? At baseline, we'll have kind of equivalent numbers of aggressive and non-aggressive people in each group. And that is incredibly valuable to rule out some of those individual differences that could drive these effects or otherwise confound the results of the study. But laboratory research comes with its own set of problems. We have to ask, are these results what's called ecologically valid? So do they generalize to the real world? When we bring aggression into the laboratory, we are creating sort of this artificial, sterile environment. And there's a lot of criticisms of that environment. So one is that we have to change the nature of the aggressive response. We can't have in the laboratory scenarios in which people physically aggress against one another. Right? Or very often even verbally aggress against one another for ethical reasons. And so often how aggression is measured is through, for instance, playing a competitive game against an opponent, and if you win, you get to deliver through headphones to your opponent a blast of noise. You get to pick the volume and the duration of that noise blast, with a louder, longer noise blast indicating a more aggressive response. But the question is, okay, if I deliver a loud, long noise blast in the lab, am I also likely to go out into the real world and slap someone in the face? Maybe, maybe not, right? So the nature of the violent act is different. It's manifested in a different way in the laboratory compared to the real world. Some have also argued that there may be demand characteristics, or just in general that people's behavior may be constrained in the context of the laboratory. So they have fewer behavioral options to deal with this provocation, this insult, right? So if we take, for instance, our Bandura study, we have our preschoolers who are insulted by the denial of toys. And maybe in the real world, when they felt that frustration, they would go to their mom, right, and tell them or cry, right, and be comforted by their mother. But they don't have that option in the context of the laboratory. All they have is this room with the Bobo doll, and so they behave aggressively. But maybe they wouldn't have out in the real world when they had a greater number of choices for how to deal with that frustration. And so that's one big criticism with this research. Research has also started to examine not just does violent media predict subsequent aggressive behavior, but more specifically, how might aggressive behavior lead to, aggressive media lead to an increase in aggressive behavior? And so there could be a variety of effects of violent media. The one that we'll talk about first is this idea that violent media may prime aggression, may prime aggressive behaviors. And one way that it may do this is by providing aggressive cues. We look at what's called the weapons effect. The weapons effect is an increase in aggression that can occur because of the mere presence of a gun or weapon. In a classic experiment by Berkowitz and LePage in '67 that was conducted in Wisconsin with 100 exclusively male participants, which could be problematic. But we have in this study participants who were told that they and a partner would each have to solve a creative problem, knowing that their performance would be evaluated by their partner. And the evaluations would come in the form of electric shocks, with 1 shock signifying a very good rating and 10 shocks meaning that their performance was judged as very bad. The participant was randomly assigned to, regardless of his performance in the task, to receive either a bad evaluation in the form of 7 shocks or a good evaluation with only 1 shock. So regardless of how they do, they are randomly assigned to receive either 7 or 1 shock. And the idea is that the 7 shock would be the insult, right? It's essentially saying that your partner here thinks that you did very poorly in this task and is punishing you sort of with 7 shocks. Then our participant has the chance to evaluate the partner who shocked them, right, in the same manner by delivering electric shocks. The participant is taken into a room with a shock generator, and on the table is also either a shotgun or a revolver, or nothing, or non-weapon, a badminton racket. And so if we look at the behavior of our participant in terms of delivering electric shocks, what Berkowitz and LePage found was that those males who were angered, who had received the 7 shocks, and were in the presence of a weapon, either the revolver or the shotgun, delivered significantly more shocks to their partner compared to those who were not angered, and compared to even those who were angered but not in the presence of a weapon. So either there was no object on the table other than the shock generator, or there was a badminton racket. Not only that, not only were they delivering more shocks, but they were holding down the button longer, so attempting to prolong the duration of the shock. So again, both of these sort of suggesting a more aggressive response is occurring particularly in the presence of a weapon. And so the argument here, the theory, is that the weapon is serving as an aggressive cue. So it is priming aggressive related thoughts and behavioral scripts that then makes aggressive behavior more probable after being exposed to this prime, this cue. So it's activating these aggressive related concepts in memory that is then influencing their behavior. And that is how aggressive media, and maybe even here the mere presence of a weapon, is influencing subsequent aggressive behaviors. And so we have to sort of explore this accessibility hypothesis more specifically. So do we know for sure that the weapon is making aggressive related thoughts, behavioral scripts more kind of at the forefront of their mind, right? More cognitively accessible. In this particular study by Anderson and colleagues, we have a more kind of direct test of this. So this is a more kind of classic priming study. Participants are seated in front of a computer screen. They read a series of words that are presented on the screen for 1.2 seconds. These words are either weapons-related words, things like shotgun, machete, grenade, or they are related to animals, bird, fish, that sort of thing. Then we have a blank screen that appears for half a second, and then they are asked to identify out loud as quickly as possible a target word. And that word will be either aggressive in nature or neutral. And so our dependent variable of interest is how quickly and accurately they can identify this target word. And the prediction is that the nature of the prime, the weapon or the animal prime, will influence their performance on the target words, how quickly and accurately they can identify those target words. And so here's some examples of our aggressive words in that target word list. So things like stab, slap, etc. And our non-aggressive words, things like relax. What Anderson and colleagues found was that being exposed to the weapons-related words did prime aggressive concepts, making it easier for them to quickly and accurately identify aggressive target words compared to neutral words. Right? So they're primed, they're ready, prepared to see those aggressive words, and so it's facilitating processing, specifically for content that is aggressive in nature, right? And potentially disrupting processing of content that is neutral or not related to aggression. So we have some support for this cognitive accessibility hypothesis that weapons and violent media may make cognitive aggression more accessible, or may make thoughts of aggression more cognitively accessible. Now, of course, this is all kind of dependent upon our theory of the structure of long-term memory, right? And the idea that the reason that being exposed to weapons primes aggressive related thoughts is because that is cognitively the connection that we make in long-term memory, that we associate weapons with violence and aggression. And now this may be unique to certain individuals, right? Or essentially may be influenced by your personal experiences. And there is some research to suggest that people who have different experiences with guns may have different associations that are cognitively accessible when exposed to guns. So for instance, individuals who use guns for recreational sports and for recreational hunting may be less likely than others to associate weapons that are associated with those sports with aggression, right? And so we may see some individual differences in how people respond to the weapons effect or to weapons prime.